to the presentation about zombies. So I will be talking about the definition that I came up with, what are the sources of infection, how to spot such an infection, and how to deal with it. But before we dive into that, let me just throw a word of introduction about myself. I've been in this industry for 15 years now. The first decade I've dedicated to working as a producer for several Polish game companies like 11-Bit Studios or CD Projekt Red. And 5 years ago, I've decided to set up my own company, indie game studios called Covenant.dev. So during that time, I've worked on a number of different projects, ranging from a small match 3, never again kind of a title, to more elaborative, like AAA RPGs, like most notably The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt. During my time at Covenant, I've worked on a number of different projects, but the one that got released was Gord, Dark Fantasy strategy game, and its expansion pack, The Alliance, released last year. And last year I had an opportunity to actually give a speech here at Digital Dragons about the post-mortem for this project, post-mortem of Gord. Has anybody seen that presentation last year? All right, few people. I get it. The room was quite small, so I understand that not all of you could fit there. In any case, thanks for the rating, still. But yeah, anywho, let's continue with the presentation about zombie projects. So how would I define it? Well, zombie project, in my mind, refers to a development endeavor that continues to consume significant amount of time and resources and effort despite demonstrating minimal or no potential for artistic merit, positive reputation, quite a lengthy definition there, right? Positive reputation impact, or most importantly, financial returns. So in short, it's a resource sink. It's alive in terms of effort, but it's dead in terms of the outcomes. Why am I talking about it? Well, I am talking about it because there are a lot of zombie projects out there. Like last year, nearly 80% of projects released on Steam have been flagged as limited games. So games that haven't gathered enough attention among the players to actually evolve to allow, for example, for achievements or Steam trading cards or whatnot. So 80% of them have failed. So you can say that Steam is actually a new zombie land. We've heard about indie apocalypse, let's talk about zombie apocalypse. Here, it's a real problem, and you need to know how to navigate in such an environment, both as a user and as a developer, and how to avoid turning your project into one of them. So first off, let's talk about the sources of such infections. So why do video game projects fail? Pretty simple question, but still very, very important one. And I will be running a few surveys here, live surveys. So if you want, you could participate just by scanning this QR code and just putting your answer in it. I guess you can actually put more than one answer. So I'll give you a few seconds if you would like to participate and give your opinion about what is the reason why do you think video game projects fail. It should work and it should display the results live. If it won't work and there will be 0 responses, oh yeah, a couple of you do respond. That's good, thank you. Thank you for that. And if you will be finished with that, please do not close this app because there will be more surveys along the way, and they will be all using the same link, so you don't need to close that, and it will be activated the moment I'll get to that slide. And this is falling all the time. I guess I have too little years for such a device. All right, All right. So we've got lack of vision as a leading source of problems. That's interesting. That's interesting. Thank you for those private. Right, cool. It's an open question, so you can put in whatever you like. Hopefully, something because this is a recording, so people will be watching that later on YouTube. So don't go too crazy with results, with the answers. All right, but you've got that bad ideas, limited marketing, obvious answer DUPA or ELO, so that's something that I anticipated. Too many flips, too expensive, lack of polish. All right, boring gameplay. That's important because like there are. Hi, mom. This is the best one. This is important, because I will be showing you the actual results of some research that has been done around that topic. Not directly trying to answer this question, but something around it. So the first research that I wanted to quote was published in 2016. Do I have a pointer? All right, so it was by like Washburn and others. And the most common best practices, what they did is that they analyzed postmortems. They read a lot of postmortems published by the game developers on Gamma Sutra, over 200 of them, but like 155 made the cut. And they made the paper like what went right, what went wrong, trying to categorize all the reasons, all the aspects of those postmortems that have been written by the developers, and then just count which ones of them were most common. So, like the best practices is one thing, but this presentation is about the pitfalls. So, the first and number one answer was unexpected challenges. So they called it this category obstacles. And within this category falls some examples like our lead had a car accident and we haven't expected that, or we needed to transition to remote working from stationary working. So that's what was, again, something unexpected that happened to that production. Then there are two categories that relate to the development process and like schedules, like production things, right? So scheduling is one thing, very, very common source of problems with video game projects is underestimating the time that you need to develop certain features, so scheduling. And then development process failures, development process bugs. To give you an example, the levels are being developed simultaneously to the story of the game, so as much as the artists put the effort into creating the wonderful world, the writers are changing the story, so the world needs to change as well. So those sorts of like broken workflows, broken pipelines, again, are the reasons of project failures, the most common pitfalls. And then the game design category, which would include those aspects that you listed, for example, in this little survey of ours. So, for example, bad idea, or like the lack of proper vision, or like unclear vision, or the vision being changed too often. All right, so that's the first study. And the second study that followed that was released in 2021 by Politovsky, Petrillo, Ullman, and others. And this one was more in-depth. Like, they also read a lot of postmortems, but instead of focusing on the main points, like what went right, what went wrong, they focused about problems. So what they wanted to do is that they wanted to distill all the problems that were mentioned during the postmortem article, well, within the postmortem article, and then they identified like 927 problems, so GameDev has some issues, and then they categorized those problems within 22 categories, and then counted which ones were reoccurring most often. So as you can see, like again, some game design issues were apparent, but then they also listed that the team issues, like lack of manpower or overworked staff or toxic culture or poor collaboration, communication issues are very, very important. So like 3 categories like related to team, 3 different points related to game design, for example, overambitious, like the case of Gord, incomplete or shifting game design. Those are the issues that you should be looking at, you should be considering for your project. And then they pointed out that most recently, back in this period, and I think that's still valid until now, the marketing issues are on the rise. So it's very difficult right now in terms of discoverability of your project, or like poor audience targeting in terms of this huge oversaturated market that we have right now, full of zombies. So take into account those problems, because those research already like answer those questions. Like those research already give us pretty good idea of what is happening most commonly in our industry, what is the source of our problems. What you should be asking yourself is that, does my project suffer from those issues? Have I actually asked myself the question of whether or not like I have a good marketing, or whether or not my team is in a good condition, or do we have proper tools, etc., etc. Why? Because that's the most common problems that people face, the project face, and that accumulate later on and then result in your project being a zombie. So how to spot such an infection? So if we already know what's the common issues, how to actually know if those relate to me? How to validate a video game project, especially before the release. And I will be focusing this presentation mostly on the product itself. So on the product aspect, on the marketing aspect of the game. I cannot like encapsulate the whole area of those issues. I won't be talking about HR issues, or for example, toxic culture, how to identify those issues, or for example, how to identify whether or not your workflow is broken. So, because that will be a bit of a overscoping for me in this short period of this presentation. But there are also methods, a lot of methods for you to actually evaluate that, and I would encourage you to employ them in terms of the team, for example, doing surveys, talking with your team, obviously, and trying to get the sense of what's the situation around the organization, and in terms of the product or the production side of it, like evaluate your workflows, just check like how long, for example, does it take to you to get to this particular feature, how to deliver a monster, for example, how to deliver a full level, how long does it take, how costly is it to actually deliver such a feature, and will it scale in a full production. So this is actually relatively easy to evaluate, but again, not many people do that because they are so invested in their product, the production, their field of expertise. They want to make the best game. They do not care that much about, for example, evaluating whether or not our workflow is actually optimal for this project. So won't be talking about those categories anymore because of the time constraints. Let's focus more about the product and evaluating it before the release, especially. So I've asked around before the presentation. I've checked with a couple of my colleagues, how do they approach this issue? What methods do they employ in order to check their investment along the way? And I've created this clunky word cloud that you can barely read. So there are like screenshot analysis, like self-assessments, telemetry data, informal feedback that you can get, like bunch of different things that you can employ in order to identify the problems that can be happening in your project. So let me ask you this, like which of those are actually employed at your organization? I've just listed a couple of them here. And if you have, again, this app open, or you can scan again this code, I would encourage you to just pick those that you actually use in your company. Okay, so we've got like playtests on the rise. Then I've listed also like internal team reviews, something that is at the bottom of the list, for example, checking the game's profile against contemporary market data. I would emphasize this contemporary aspect here. Silent reviews, if you don't know that, like it's a review that you can run under NDA across, for example, journalists on your early build. So I see that's also not very common to do. But thank you for your participation, like 45 people. I think is quite a good result. So what you can ask yourself here at this point, like why my organization is not using those elements, those methods from the bottom of the list, right? Maybe they are not useful, maybe you don't believe in them at all, maybe they are too costly, although I would argue with that last statement. I think that running surveys, for example, or like checking this against the market data is something that you can do relatively easy and within very, very low cost. And I'll get to that in a second. So there are methods, and we'll get back to those methods in a moment, so don't worry about that. So we know the sources, more or less. We know that there are a lot of methods how to deal with those, and now how to handle such issues once they are identified through those methods that we've listed a moment ago. So, as you can deal with a zombie, you can either nourish it by just throwing this juicy kind of a rib to him, or like you can transplant a bit of his body to something different. So like substitute one feature to another. So like instead of doing this level editor, maybe you could deepen your core mechanic. You can amputate, so simply like cut some parts, like cut some features, or you can like end the project. Just kill it. And sometimes it's the best option to do, although it's not very common. Most common result of the evaluation of the project is to actually nourish it. That's why we have 80% of zombie projects on Steam, while the better options would be probably somewhere in the middle, if not to end this endeavor. So an exercise, and the last pool, I promise, last pool here, an exercise, you have a guy that approaches you and says that, yeah, we're doing a first-person fantasy RPG game with real-time co-op, a spellcrafting system, very unique one, deep story, massive open world, of course, epic boss fights with a huge enemies, base building, level editor, PvP, modding support, launching simultaneously on multiple platforms from a new team of ex-AAA developers. So what you would do about it? Like, obviously, it depends. Like, you would need to ask around, like, ask more questions, like, what's the story about, like, etc., etc. What's the setting? Maybe you have some IP, maybe it's a new IP, blah, blah, blah. But let's say that you've got this, only this pitch to evaluate at this point. All right. Again, we've got those 50 participants. Thank you so much for that. And I would definitely agree with this leading answer. So like to amputate, if not kill, then at least amputate. I wouldn't kill because RPGs can be very attractive. It's a very attractive genre, sure. And if there is some experience within the team, depends on what kind of developers are we talking about, but still, there might be some potential in this project. I wouldn't kill it right off the bat on the base of this pitch, but I would definitely amputate. I would definitely amputate, cut a lot of those features, at least from the 1.0 version, the first version of the game. Okay? So how can that approach be applied in real life? How can I use it in real life? And let's summarize what we know right now. So there are some sources of problems that people face by doing video game projects. So game design issues are one thing, the team issues are other thing. There are production issues. Those are the most common pitfalls of the video game projects. And then we have a bunch of methods how to evaluate the project on every stage. So what you can do right now is to split the project into multiple phases. We usually call them milestones. And if you haven't done that yet with your project, then you're doing it wrong. You should be splitting it as much as you can to, for example, those phases like concept, prototype, vertical slide, blah, blah, blah. And then try to evaluate the project after each and every stage. So you should be having a viable build at the end of most of those milestones, stable build, performant build that delivers some sort of promise that was delivered, that was done throughout this milestone. And then you take that and try to evaluate that internally and externally using all the methods that you can get your hands on, and then decide. Decide whether to nourish, transplant, amputate, or kill at every stage of the development. So what I would encourage you to do is just to follow those 3 steps approach on each and every stage, not to leave the project, not to continue with this YOLO development after each and every stage, regardless of the feedback that you're getting, not to get some feedback and make some small adjustments and then still continue with the YOLO development. Rather, hold your horses for a second and try to evaluate what you have done so far throughout those milestones. Deep breath. Let's dive deeper into each and every aspect of it. So, for example, let's say that you are starting a new project and you have this killer elevator pitch that you're saying everywhere and people love it, especially your mom, and you're going with the production, right? No, let's stop for a second. Firstly, ask yourself whether this concept is actually complete. Have you actually thought about what is my budget? What is my target first year sales? What is my breakpoint? What is break-even point, sorry. What is my target asking price? What are my target localizations? So why is it important? Because it will influence your production. And it may influence, and it probably will influence, your results, your end results. So for example, you're doing your best project you can, and you've launched it, it's a great game, but then you actually notice in the final results after the release that people that loved this game actually have a lower spec PCs, and you haven't provided them with a proper localization, and you've lost most of the market that you could actually address right from the very beginning because you haven't thought about it at all, and you just went with it. What's my minimal specs? I don't care. Let's do it. Best looking game I can squeeze. out of this engine and then release, and the specs are very high, like 60% of people who would like to play this game cannot because of the specs, and you already failed because you haven't identified that at the very beginning. So, and even if you did fill out this form of like identifying those issues, like for example, not many people identify their hook and anchor in their game, then not many people like question themselves, like question whether I actually picked the best genre for this game, whether I picked the right blend of features for this game. I've recently had a chance to consult a couple of IPs that could be converted into games, and the first question that we ask ourselves, like, what would be the best genre for this game? It's not like I have this like IP or I have this idea, and I always wanted to do an action game, like third-person action game, so my first game will be a third-person action game. No, that's stupid. Like, that's not a valid reason to do so. Like, you should actually think, like, will my gameplay, my target gameplay, and will my audience actually want this game to be, like, within this camera perspective? Would my target audience welcome this kind of feature within this game in the first release? Or is it totally unimportant for them, for example? How can I lower my specs? How can I improve the gameplay length if it's important for my players? Have I analyzed, for example, similar products that released no later than 2 years past in comparison to my profile, the profile of my game? Or have I just thought that, yeah, so like Minecraft did good, so I'll do something similar right now. And maybe I'll do similar, pull off similar results, right? Like oftentimes when we think about the games that we want to do, we just see or think about the best game that we liked. We try to compare to that. And then we haven't thought about, like, for example, comparing, as we saw in the survey, comparing this profile with like all other games on Steam that fits the same checkboxes, like have the same genre, for example, like same features, etc., etc. And then we can see that you can do that on, for example, GameDiscover.co, like fill out this form, and you can see that, oh, like similar games actually released in the last 5 years actually sold on average like 50,000 units, median even lower or something like that. And I estimated that my first year sales will be like 300,000. Like, is it possible? Yes, sure. It's possible. Everything is possible. It's just highly unlikely that it will happen. And it's just the fact that you haven't done that comparison. You haven't spent that, 20 or 30 bucks for the license of such a database to just compare that idea to the market to see what you could actually expect. And if you haven't done that, then you cannot know like what kind of a budget is actually worth investing in this project. Because if like similar games throughout the last, let's say even 10 years, like 20 games, sold less than 100,000 units at a certain price point, you cannot say that you will sell more for a higher price, and that transitions to the budget that you can allocate in this project. Because if you cannot do that, if you should estimate, for example, for a lower sales, then you have to estimate for a lower budget. And it's all connected. It's all connected, and if you haven't asked yourself those questions, then you're running into risk. It's not like you will fail if you don't ask those questions. Maybe you won't. Maybe you won't. It's just that you're running into a risk that you will. You're increasing the probability of failure of this project. Now, if you have done that, if you have this kind of a brief about your game, and you have this pitch deck, what you can do with this in this concept phase. So you can do this check with the market research. You can exchange some opinions with trusted game devs. I wouldn't go to publishers just yet, because unless you have a very good relationship with them, because there is this first impression kind of a thing, and you might waste this opportunity. I wouldn't go to friends and family, because they will also have a similar response to the publishers. Yeah, it's interesting, but we need to see the playable, while in fact it's actually totally boring. But all the publishers will say that it's interesting and they need the playable. So you're actually misguided into doing something that is wrong from the very beginning just because you've just thrown yourself out there. So there are actually a lot of very accessible databases out there to use about that. And again, like this is, let's say, this first stage, this concept phase of your project. And what you can do, again, you cut this at this moment in time, and you try to decide what to do with certain aspects of my game, whether I continue with this design, whether I change it a little bit, whether I reduce it, or whether or not it's actually worth my time to actually pursue. Maybe there are other ideas that's lurking in your drawer somewhere, and you can just pick and actually have better results. So that's one thing. And then let's say that you've done all of that, you're happy with the results, you've evaluated that against, for example, market data, your colleagues says it's fine, etc., etc. But you would, they suggest that you should, for example, cut this feature, cut that feature, change this, change that. So you change the design, the initial design, after the results of the study, of the surveys you ran, etc., the opinions you've gathered. So what do? Most commonly, the people will certainly continue with the fact that, oh yeah, we seen some feedback, we've adjusted it somehow, and now we're ready to go, right? Like we did everything, we're ready to go. We can spend more money and actually develop the game. What I would encourage you to do is to actually iterate on that project. So if you change the design, run those surveys again. Check that again with the market data, with this different approach that you created, with this new profile of the game that you've created. Not run into all those burn rates right from the bat. So that's one thing. So that's first milestone, let's say, this concept phase. Now, you can see the structure that I'm going for. Like each and every stage along the way will unlock more possibilities for you actually to evaluate this project. So after the concept phase, so like paper profile of the game, then you can, let's say you did the prototype. You have the prototype. Firstly, ask yourself whether this prototype actually is a valid prototype, whether it actually delivers the promise of showing the core gameplay loop and core mechanics of your game. Because if it's not, then it's a wrong prototype. Then it's you're for example, doing a beauty corner, right? So you've did something, a build, which is playable, which is nice, but actually doesn't have any mechanics in it. So people like it because it looks nice, but it's actually not a valid prototype for you to pursue later on. So that's one thing. Like think about doing a prototype that's actually, truly says and truly expresses the core value of your project. That's one thing. If it does, then you've got more options right now. You've got a playable, right? So you've got more options to evaluate. You can already do some even silent reviews. You can go again to your trusted colleagues, but now with a playable build rather than just promises on the paper. You can go to investors. You can, again, run surveys. I would encourage you to do so, even though some of you may be reluctant to throw away the bills everywhere, but still you can, for example, record some short videos or a playthrough video and then run a survey. And it's very, very easy and cheap to actually do. It's also very easy to mess up, but if you know what you're doing in terms of structuring the survey, you can actually do it within hours and then throw it out there using like Polfish or other apps and spend like few thousand zlotys and actually gather a few hundred responses from US market, let's say, within hours of saying whether or not, for example, they like this feature, whether or not they like or how do they rate your banners, your capsules on Steam. Like those sorts of resources are easily accessible by the cost of like few thousand zlotys within hours. It's just that not many people do that like effort, make that effort and actually do that. But I would encourage you to try at least. And then I would add this friends and family here even on this level, because if the chances are that your family is not a hardcore kind of a player base, which means that if they can get your game, then probably your target audience will get it as well. So like this is also a nice test here to be doing. And then potential publishers, even if you're not interested in actually publishing your game with a third party, still, like I would send out this build just to get a free feedback from specialists about your game, even if you're doing the self-publishing. So, all right, so now, the second step, and you've got more opportunities right now to evaluate what you did. And again, this is a step where you can stop for a moment and think whether you want to throw this meat to your zombie project or transplant or amputate, or whether or not, this project is actually a zombie. Maybe it's a wonderful one, and everybody are absolutely, thrilled about it. That's awesome. That's awesome. But chances are you would rather want to transplant something or amputate something and still think to optimize it even more, to buy some more time, buy some more buffer, taking into account, having in mind that most of the projects in GameDev are underestimated in terms of the schedules. There are workflow problems, and they fail because of that. Keep that in mind. 80% of projects fail. So even though it seems all right, etc., think if you have done that correct way. So for example, many people would approach a prototyping in a very messy way. They would, we want to do a prototype as quickly as possible because of that, usually money. And they will not test, for example, their workflows. Like they will do it in a messy way, and it will take months to create one enemy and one level. And then they will say that, yeah, sure, but now we know how to do it. We'll do 1,000 more within a year or something. That's not, you haven't actually tested it. You haven't actually proven that this workflow that you are working in is scalable and that you actually have a plan. And if you don't have a plan, maybe you will deliver this project, but not within a year, but within 5 years. And if you do that within 5 years, it will cost, X amount of money, and it won't return. It won't give you those returns over investment that you're counting on, and that will turn your project into a zombie. So again, at every aspect and every stage of your development, after you did some adjustments, so for example here, after the prototyping phase, you have this displayable, you made some adjustments. Again, plan for at least 2 prototypes. Plan for at least 2 vertical slices. If you look at your plan, your production plan, and it says yeah, we'll do a prototype here, and within 2 months we'll do a vertical slice, and within again few more months we'll do content complete. Well, yeah, but what if you would like to do some adjustments to it, change something, even a very significant one? Why are you doing a prototype or a vertical slice if you are not planning to actually change something within this vertical slice and just run with it, right? So that's the reason why projects fail, and that's the reason why those Scheduling issues are one of the common issues of game development and not why this clicker is not working. So again, now the next stage, vertical slice, and again, like the list grows, right? You've got more and more things that you can do. For example, you can now make this project public. You can do a Steam page that you obviously tested before, experimented with, did some surveys, A/B testing, for example, among your target audience. Then you release the Steam page. Now you've got it. You have the opportunity to interact with the community, with the media, monitor that. And again, this milestone opens up more opportunities for you to evaluate this project, to track media, for example. If it's not done by your PR agency, you can do it yourself. Again, using some third-party apps. And again, after that, you can decide whether or not to transplant, amputate, kill, or leave it alone, and it's fine, right? So again, this gives you the opportunity. You have time. Like at the very beginning, when you're planning everything, you have this feeling of having a time. And if you have that time, please plan for iterations and plan for changes. And if you plan for that, and if you plan for having the buffer for those kind of checks, do them as often as you can. That's my point. Again, the next phase, for example, alpha. Let's say alpha in your regards is like a full playthrough from beginning to the end of the whole campaign. Again, it opens up more opportunities for you to check it. You can check the player reviews. For example, also you can launch a demo of your game. So again, you can track some KPIs, some downloads, viewer comments. Again, try to gather it, use some telemetry data. Again, like not many companies do that for some reason. They just like think that if you're launching a game, then you will, track the Steam data and like the comments. And in the comments, the people say, yeah, like this enemy is difficult, this is not, and 5 people said something like that. So all right, so we're changing the balance, right? No, there are actually a lot of methods to do it in a right way, like to do it in a better way, more reliable way. It's not saying that it's awesome, it's perfect, it's not, but like using the insights in Unreal or other like third-party software allows you to employ and get the more like in-depth details about your game and evaluate, again, in-depth like this and that feature if it's actually executed in a correct way. So as you can see, like more and more down the line, you're unlocking more and more methods to evaluate your project, and please do actually use them. Please actually use them, because it's the very, very reason, in my opinion, the main reason of actually 80% of projects being a zombie is that people don't even try. People don't even try to actually honestly evaluate their projects using the accessible tools that are out there and iterate. And again, you can see the structure here. Media reactions, bug reports. Then there are, for example, hardware specification data that you can get from Steam, etc., etc. Again, more and more data that you can use, that you can show to your decision makers, and then have a good decision to be taken along the way. So that's basically the structure that I would encourage you to follow. Just split the project into phases, have in mind the most common sources of video game projects failing, try to honestly ask yourself those questions, use those methods, and adjust, iterate, and plan for those iterations. So that's basically my idea for it that I wanted to share, and I would like to thank you for your attention and participation. And if you have any questions, I guess we've got a few minutes left.
Hi, Stan. A great one. You skipped a couple of slides
towards
the end, accidentally, I believe. Could you maybe run through the end state of the presentation again? Thank you very much.
I didn't want to bore you with the ending because it's
sorry, the Steam
repeating
access one, I guess.
Oh, sorry. It's repeating itself at the end because it's adding the same elements.
Got it. Thank you very much.
Sure. Okay. I'll leave it at that. Yeah, you won't be able to approach the microphone, so. Sure. So I talked a bit more about it during this presentation, which is accessible on YouTube if you're interested. But definitely in terms of the gourds, there was a feature creep right from the very beginning. So like on the concept phase, there was this huge amount of features and promises that have been made with the intention of making the project as rich as possible, as rich in variety, as rich in features as possible. So we had this notion that, we'll offer as much as possible to the players. They will appreciate that because they will have this, and that, and it will, make their money's worth. But at the end, it's actually, comes down to the core gameplay loop, which should be the focus of the production and the depth of it. While in our case, in the previous production, was a bit convoluted and too complex. I think that we've learned that lesson, like with the next production that we've released the demo last year, which is called Across the Wonderlands, which is an open-world survival crafting game. There is quite of a different approach there. Like this game is much more systemic and closed in terms of the feature scope. We won't have, for example, 50 minutes of elaborative cinematics there, like fully mock-up because of reasons. So those were the main things. There were some unexpected challenges. So one of the main categories of those problems, like for example, Baldur's Gate 3 releasing a month earlier than it should, which totally destroyed our reaches. But that's, that happens. So, all right, guys. Thank you for your attention again. See you next time.